If you've been doing CrossFit for a while, but it's been a few months since you've seen some real progress, your PBs have dried up, gymnastic skills don't seem to be going anywhere, there are 3 likely reasons as to why. And none of them are to do with consistency or hard work, because if they were the answers, you probably would be further along than where you are right now. Over the last 12 months, I've helped 155 athletes to clean up these mistakes, and I guarantee that mistake number 1 is probably happening in your training week right now. Let's take a closer look. Okay, problem number 1 is that we are training at the wrong intensity, which is definitely going to be the case if you are predominantly using a class-based structure. Let me show you why. Okay, so we walk into the gym, we look at the whiteboard, and we've got a strength piece. Maybe it's 10 to 15 minutes of something, changes throughout the week, and then you have a WOD after. Maybe it's a chipper, maybe it's Fran, maybe it's some ergs. It's normally going to be 8 to 20 minutes long. And you leave the gym every day, you've worked hard, you've sweated a lot, you're probably quite tired, and you feel like you've had a really good training session. But the problem is, we've spent all week, all year, all the time doing these classes, getting really good at doing these bottom WODs. And I know this because athletes that come to me who train predominantly in this area, when I ask them in their consultation process, what is your major strengths at the minute? Nearly all of them say, I'm good at grunt work. I'm good at burpees, I'm good at lunges, I'm good at getting my head down and doing a good workout and pushing myself really hard, which is great. And that is typically what class athletes are really good at. When I ask them about their strength, it's okay. When I ask them about their skills at the top of the pyramid, we have problems. We have athletes that haven't progressed in their toes to bar muscle up feels miles away, struggle with taking 1 or 2 steps on their hands. And then when we dive a bit deeper into strength, they've had numbers that have been fairly consistent over a long period of time, but they haven't seen any major increases in their snatches, their cleans, their squats, etc. since they first started. And this is exactly what I would expect to see from an athlete that is following this type of structure, is that you get really, really good at the mixed modal, so 2 or 3 exercises happening at once, WODs that are around 8 to 20 minutes. Everything else, not so much. So if you actually want to see a breakthrough, what we need to do is stop training in this kind of one dimension down the bottom and start looking at the whole picture. Look at the bigger space, zoom out. This is typically what a lot of my athletes will follow in terms of structure. Not everyone, because everyone is different, and depending on where your strengths and weaknesses lie and where in your journey you are, will determine what this pie chart looks like for you. But generally speaking, this is a good indication as to what most athletes need who are stuck in their gymnastics, haven't seen many lifting wins, and need a change. So the majority of their programming should be strength, and I'm going to come back to this in a little bit, but this needs to be strength that is specific to the movements you need to work on and the weaknesses that you have. It's not just any old strength, it's specific strength. Next up, really important, this is something that is missed from 9 out of 10 athletes' work, especially in the volume that you need it to. Some athletes will go to a gymnastics class. Maybe their gym has one of those a week, or maybe they have an Olympic class once a week, and they go and do that specific skill training for that 1 hour a week, which is great. It's more than a lot of people do, but we need consistent skill-based training in your week, in your training day, all the time. If you want to work and get the toes to bar, or you want to hit bar muscle up, or you want to get your chest to bar, or you want to get a heavier snatch, you need to have both the strength and the skill work in your week to make that happen. You can't have one or the other, you need both, and they need to work together. Next up, when we come to fitness, you need actually a balance. You need some of your work to be the long, slow, boring zone 2 type workouts where we're building a consistent base, creating the bottom of the pyramid. And then we also need some of your work to be a really high intensity, which is your WOD based training. Typically a higher intensity than you normally go in classes, but nevertheless, that is probably the most realistic thing that the class represents, is these WODs. The way that we normally flip things when I work with athletes is that we still keep classes in, still keep that fitness and that intensity, but we make it work within their pie chart for what they need. So we take the kind of fitnessy things down a little bit because they're doing much more than they need, and we massively increase the strength and skills. Ignore the size of my pen, sorry. Okay, what is mistake number 2? This is scaling reps. Or more specifically, it's not actually scaling reps, it's using scaled reps as your only method to try and get the rep that you want. So it is overusing or only using things like a kipping knees to chest rep when you can't do a toes to bar, or a toes to target when you can't do a toes to bar. It's using box jumping bar muscle ups to do bar muscle ups, because you can't do those yet. It's using things like, if pull-ups are in the workout, always grabbing a band to do pull-ups. And if this is your only strategy to getting the rep, I will tell you free, you are not gonna get there. You need a hell of a lot more than just using the scaled version of your rep in a workout in order to take you there. What you actually need, and this is leading on from what I just said, strength needs to be specific to the skills that you want to learn. So if your main focuses at the minute are to improve your gymnastics, then the strength specific to that is going to be pull strength, push strength, core strength, shoulder stability, hip work, etc. That is all the strength that should be making up your training time. Next, the skills, they need to be progressive and they need to meet you at where you're currently at. If you are brand new and you've never tried, you can't do a toes to bar and you're brand new to the movement, you're going to be at a very different level to somebody who has got 5 toes to bar but they're trying to turn that into 15 to 20. The drills need to be progressive. You need to enter at the level that is appropriate for you. It needs to be matched with the strength work over here. But most importantly, especially with the drills, is it needs to be properly coached. You need eyes on, because doing drills correctly is actually really, really hard. It's quite easy to find good drills on the internet, on Instagram. If you follow my page, I share heaps of different drills, but actually doing them correctly is really difficult. Each drill that is given has a purpose, whether it's trying to identify and work on a particular point within the movement, and in order to do that, it needs a specific input. It needs the athlete to be doing something very specific in order to get the output and the purpose of the drill. And just by watching something on YouTube or Instagram and not really understanding why they're doing it or what you're aiming for when you're doing it, doesn't actually necessarily make the drill any use at all, especially when you get to harder movements like bar muscle ups, like chest bar, like handstand walking. It's actually really difficult to do the drills correctly first time, and you need eyes on, you need regular eyes on so that you're actually coached through the process. This is a piece that is missed, not by class athletes, because class athletes don't tend to have access to these drills, but this is missed by athletes who are on a program like Train Your Weakness. I like Train Your Weakness, but I'm just using an example, who have all the information but they're not actually coached, so they're not necessarily doing things properly, they're not at the right stage of progressions, and they're actually ingraining bad habits because they're improperly doing work which is actually now going to make the skills longer to achieve. Alrighty, mistake number 3, are we ready? It's not enough bodybuilding, bruh. And when I say this, I do mean bodybuilding in the sense I mean structured sets, reps, rest of strength, but really I'm specifically referring to strength. A lot of people when they start CrossFit, they've already come from some kind of gym background. And a lot of people have come from powerlifting or bodybuilding, where the majority of their training has been quite slow. It's been sets, reps, rest. They kind of sit on the bench in between their sets and are on their phone and there's not much going on. And when they come to CrossFit, they're like, oh, I love the intensity, I love that we're doing WODs, I love that it's always different, I love the ever-changing aspect about it, which is great. But then they kind of forget all of that foundational work that they had been doing. And it doesn't need to be as quote unquote boring as it was in a bodybuilding sense, but you still need to have that foundation of strength in order to take you forwards. If you want a snatch PR, a clean and jerk PR, if you want better gymnastics or new gymnastics or just any kind of gymnastics, in order to get there, you have to have that base of strength, like I've already said. You have to be doing things like pull-up and dips and a bench press and strict presses for all of your gymnastics. You need to be doing back squats and front squats and deadlifts and overhead squats and clean pulls and accessories for your Olympic lifts. If you're just going in and trying to do the movements or doing the scale version of the gymnastics reps and you're not backing it up with anything, you are never going to get to where you want to be. So if you've been doing the sport for a while, particularly if you're in classes or if you're in a program but the program isn't coached, you're probably running into one of these 3 issues, whether it's that you're training at the one intensity because it's all just the same and it doesn't vary across the board. If you're only using scaled versions of the reps to get the reps, well, that's what you always revert to, you're not doing anything else. And or you haven't got the strength base to back up what you're doing. This is why you are currently stuck. So now that you know the 3 major mistakes that I work with my athletes to avoid, I actually have a bit of a more detailed video. It's called How to Become a Snowball Athlete, and it's going to run through a training audit and really unpick what you're currently doing within your training week in more detail and give you some really practical things that you can do right now in order to take your training forwards. I'll link it below so that you can take a look, and I hope that you found this useful.